any question that encourages us to think historically, making links, tracing continuities and discontinuities between different historical periods is likely to generate a more profound, a more complex account of the world in which we live. So without wanting to say that these two periods from the 1930s to 2019, without wanting to say that they are the same, I think it's important to reflect on some of the similarities. And also I think by doing that, it helps us to think that there is something that is both new about our current era, but also something that we have faced before. And so in terms of that, quite clearly the rise of a form of right-wing populism, forms of propaganda and disinformation that were not invented in the digital era, but certainly were intensified in the 1930s in very powerful and disastrous ways, that we should be learning from those periods and not just locating everything as if it started in 2001 or even this decade. In terms of the rise of racism, anti-Semitism, a distrust of strangers, of foreigners, and so on, there are important continuities between the two periods, and we should be learning, I think, some lessons, in particularly about the media, of how we should not let claims about the dangers of immigration go unchallenged. And I think it's easy and necessary to point at the rise of fascists and clear anti-Semites, and we should be challenging them, but we should also be challenging some of the more respectable platforms, particularly in the UK, which have helped to legitimize anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, but in more respectable ways. And I think you could see some of that coverage in the 1930s in the newspapers, in the way in which we see much of that in the 2019 in new digital forums. So it seems to be very useful to learn the lessons of the 1930s and to act decisively against those political forces, but also those forces in the media which help to legitimize forms of racism, and that we should be learning those lessons for today in order most effectively to challenge discrimination, bigotry, and the rise of racism.